Oh, we're in the wrong thing here. Hold on. There we go. Hey now, we are live on Twitch only, sadly. But I don't know exactly what happened there, but, well, I kind of know what happened. But we're live. Welcome to another stream. We were supposed to be live on Twitch and YouTube, but we're just on Twitch today. I'm going to have to run some tests with my moderators and figure out why I couldn't go. Well, to let anybody out there know exactly what happened, I just tried to go live and it told me that my account on YouTube was not set up for live streaming. So I clicked the link to set up my account for live streaming, and it let me go live to YouTube, but on the wrong channel, on my gaming channel, which is weird because I'm not trying to do that. I'm not even logged into that on Streamlabs. I'm logged into John Sierra Tolkien Scholar. So I tried to make it work, but we're just going to have to do it this way, and maybe next time we'll be able to go live. But welcome in, everybody. I'm just going to real quick make an announcement that we're live. So if you guys just bear with me for a moment. I'm going to have to do that on my phone. I'm going to have to run test streams, I guess. Well, while I'm doing this, Matt and Sid, say hi to everybody. Hey, Moogle.
Hello, everybody.
Everybody, welcome to the show.
Sid here, and just a note to you, John. If you don't make it over Caradros, go under Moria. You'll find your way through.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Well,
wait, does that mean that YouTube is Carathras?
8 of you will find your way.
Well, they all found their way. It's just one guy, it took him a little bit longer.
A little bit of a detour.
Yeah. I mean, he left the world and everything. Okay, I'm just going and posting my live announcements here. I know Alice was prepared to moderate on the YouTube side of things, but I could not go live on YouTube. And it's a little bit on me for not doing a test stream at some point, but I'm so dang busy, you know? So I haven't found the time to do that, you know? But we'll have to make the time. Maybe me and Alice will figure it out. And the weirdest thing, though, is that when I followed that link that told me, here's how you enable it, and it brought me to it, it's because I was in the Firefox browser that it had me going live on that account instead of the one that would have went through Chrome. So it's just the strangest thing that I couldn't figure it out. But then when I'm like, okay, well, now that I know, let me in Google Chrome, in the correct account, go to that, and it was just like live streaming not available. And I'm like, well, why not? I'm a full partner. So there's something that I have to do in my account to enable live streams on YouTube, and I didn't know that. I thought you could just do it once you were a partner. Apparently not. So, but anyway, we're live. We're here on Twitch, and this will go on YouTube later as a video, which is not the ideal way to do it, but that's the way that we're going to wind up doing it. So, welcome everybody to the Council of Tolkien. I know we started later than we usually have, so I think that because we're starting later than we usually have, we'll have a bit less preamble here today and just sort of get into things. I just need to make sure that Alice isn't waiting over on YouTube somewhere trying to moderate chat that isn't a thing. Wait, did one of you guys... Oh, somebody... Matt, you texted me that Gemini link? Yeah, that's not...
It's for the connection thing.
Yeah, that does. Yeah, it turns out that wasn't what the problem was. That's what I thought the problem was, but it's not what the problem. For some reason or other, my account on YouTube isn't set up for that, even though it totally should be. There's probably something I need to do to turn it on. I thought it would have been turned on when I became partner, but oh well. All right. Well, we're going to go over to this screen here, and here we are at the Field of Cormallen with Gwei here soaring over. Matt, I need you to look at the camera. Hi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we are live. I need you to be looking at the camera. We're here at the Field of Cormallen. Last month, we were at Samath Naur, which was fun. This is a much better place. So the order of things today is that I'm going to go first, and then Sid is going to go second, and then Matt, you're going to bring up the rear there. And we like to mix it up time to time. I just got to find my timer because now it's... Oh, here it is. Okay, are we all ready, gentlemen?
We are ready.
Okay, so I'm going to start the timer for 2 minutes while I describe to you guys what the topic of my half-hour segment is going to be. So this came in from a question that I got on Quora, where somebody asked, what did Tolkien mean when he said strength of will? And I thought it was a rather broad question. It did not specify where or anything like that, so I had to assume it was The Lord of the Rings, because after doing a cursory search through all of his major works for strength of will, I did not find it in The Hobbit. I did not find it in the Silmarillion. I did find it 3 times in The Lord of the Rings and once in Unfinished Tales. Not at all in his letters. He never mentions strength of will, at least not in that exact phrasing in his letters. And what's interesting is that out of these 4 times that he mentioned strength of will, 3 of them were actually referring to the same topic. So just a brief overview here. The one time that did not refer to that referred to the fact that he said that it takes strength of will, or Gandalf said, I should say, that it takes a great strength of will to hold the ring to fire to make the letters appear. And this is at the Council of Tolkien, and Gandalf has already done this in Bag End. He asked Frodo for the ring. Frodo gave it to him. He tossed it into the fire. They're done. Isildur was not able to do that. I'll go over that once the intro is over. The other 3 all have to do with the Palantir. The Palantir has a lot of... It takes a lot of strength of will to use a Palantir, but also specifically to resist someone who from gaining control over you, such as Sauron in the Palantir. So that's my intro there. So let me set us up for a half hour. There we go, and we're going to start. So to just mention exactly what the context of each usage of the term strength of will is, like I said, there was the one about the ring. And Isildur wrote that when he got the ring off of Sauron's finger that he cut off from Sauron's body, there were bright letters in it. And he did not understand them because he could probably... I would imagine that Isildur was probably able to read Tengwar, but he didn't understand the Black Speech. So he never made reference to what it actually says on there, but just that letters appeared and that they faded after a while. And he theorized that this was due to Sauron's hands being very hot. He had seen his father Elendil burned to death by Sauron's hand. He saw Irene and Gil-galad burned to death by Sauron's hands. And he theorized that if one were to hold the ring to fire, that the letters may appear. However, he couldn't bring himself to do this because the ring had become precious to him, and he did not wish to mar it or harm it in any way. So Gandalf reasoned that you need a great strength of will to do this. So from this, we can conclude that he lacked that great strength of will, whereas Gandalf had it. Now, the other 3 mentions of this all have to do with the Palantir, and they all have to do with Denethor. It is mentioned that in Unfinished Tales that Denethor was a man of great strength of will. In The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf states that Denethor chose to trust in his own strength of will when contesting with Sauron in the Palantir. And of course, we know that he was not totally victorious there. I know Sid has a different view in this that he's going to go into in his segment. But basically, Sauron seemed to have gotten the better of him there, and so we can say from this that it takes a lot of will. So we're told that willpower is really great in Denethor. He's a very willful man. However, it's not enough. But then we see Aragorn come in, and Aragorn is able to not only resist Sauron, but kind of slap him around a bit. He wrests control of the Palantir from him. Now, some people will choose to interpret this as because he's the king and the Palantir are rightfully his and whatnot. However, I want you guys' opinion, but I also want to bring up my thought on why Aragorn is able to succeed here where Denethor failed. And I think it's, if we're told that Denethor is a man of great strength of will, and that wasn't enough, are we to believe that Aragorn's will is just that much greater? Or is there something else going on here? And I thought of the exact words that Gandalf used, was that he trusted in his strength of will. And basically, to me, it seems that Denethor essentially had faith in himself, and he failed in that sense. Whereas Aragorn, he kind of comes into this in a sort of doubtful manner. He agrees with Gandalf's plan to use the Palantir to trick Sauron, but even after he does it, he says that he doesn't know whether it was a smart move. He doesn't know whether this was the wise thing to do or not. And so, to me, I think he's putting his faith in Gandalf. He says, I really don't know about this. I'm just kind of doing what Gandalf says is best. So is it the fact that Aragorn here has faith in others rather than faith in himself that makes him win this contest where Denethor had lost it? So a Moogle with the watch streak there. So Sid, I know you have a unique perspective here. I'm going to go to you first and get your opinion on strength of will, not just Denethor in general, but how it works with these magical objects like the ring and the Palantir.
Happy to do it. I'm going to leave most about Denethor to my half hour. So let's talk about Aragorn. In relation to the Palantir, there are three different qualities that make it safe to use. One is rightful ownership, but both Aragorn and Denethor had that. In the time of the kings of Gondor, when they were away, the stewards had rightful authority to use the Palantir when the king was absent, and that fit for Denethor. So in this case, they both had rightful ownership, which is crucial. Pippin obviously did not. Number two, strength of will, but also in service to the righteous, whether you think of it in service directly to Eru or Eru through Elrond's teaching and Gandalf's guidance. Aragorn is a devoted servant of the Creator. And it was his faith in ultimately in the Creator, in the right way of living, that made his will unconquerable by Sauron, and his righteous ownership as the king who is coming, and the fact that the plan Eru had was to reveal the return of the king before, right at the moment of the turning of the tide of the eucatastrophe. So in a sense, the turning of the tide was when Aragorn picked up the Palantir and used it for his own ends, as he rightfully could, and showed Sauron, hey, there's somebody out here who has stronger will than you do. And Sauron would have to read that as, oh crap, the heir of Elendil has the friggin' ring.
Yeah,
And so it allowed the deceit to go on.
yeah.
So that's how I would read it.
I think we're in agreement here that it is a matter of faith, essentially. Do you think that, because we're talking about Eru Ilúvatar here and his plan for the world, which is always going to go his way, of course. And what's interesting is that there is, in this scene and in this setting, no one closer to Ilúvatar, and nor has there been anyone closer to Ilúvatar in Middle-earth for a very long time than Gandalf the White, who has even recently spoken to Ilúvatar, which, even the Valar don't speak to him all that often. But Gandalf was there, and he was given very specific instructions, of which we are not wholly privy to, but we can glean from the text. And we have Denethor, who sort of scorns Gandalf and thinks that he's a usurper who's there to install Aragorn as a puppet on the throne of Gondor. And basically, anything that Gandalf says, Denethor's just like, yeah, sure. Whereas Aragorn is this guy who has utmost reverence of Gandalf, especially after having seen him fall in Moria and then return in Fangorn Forest. So, I think of like Gandalf here as Eru Ilúvatar's direct agent, and I think this plays into the idea of it being, like, as you say, faith and the way to correctly live and to correctly make decisions as well, whereas Aragorn is told to do something by this angel and goes along with it even though he's not sure whether it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, or in his own words, whether it will lead to good things or whether it will lead to bad things, or both.
I very much agree. And that humility about one's own ability, which also Frodo had in the entire journey of carrying the ring, is the sign of a faithful servant of, a God-believing person would say Eru, but of the, of the song of the Ainur. And I would be slightly wrong. I do not believe that the exact solution is prescribed by Eru. For example, we know that the Witch King will not die by the hand of man, and Gandalf fully expects to fight the Witch King, and when he has to go save Faramir from Denethor instead, is very upset about how bad it's going to be. But he later says a substitute was found, and Tolkien says in the letters that substitution was due to Gandalf's own faith and right leadership as the steward who would allow the free people to free themselves. Yeah. So just like if you're a musician in the orchestra and the first violinist breaks a string, the second violinist picks one up. And that's what, in relation to the Witch King, that's what Eowyn and Merry did. And it was a good thing because it was the free people saving themselves and needing less from Aragorn in terms of him leading the battle.
I'm going to pass it over to Matt and get his thoughts. Just before I do that, one thought on what you said there, specifically relating to making the choice to save Faramir instead of to fight the Witch King. That, too, I think was Ilúvatar's design, because without Faramir as the steward, then we wouldn't have had the return of the king, because of how intransigent Denethor was. He kind of needed to die for it to go the proper way, which doesn't make him a bad person. It just means that he's in the way. He's in the way of God's plan. Matt, I want to get your thoughts on this, the idea of strength of will here in relation to not just the Palantir, but the ring and just in general.
Well, I think that the way that the Palantir and the ring work against everybody fits into a particular pattern, and that is that there's an earthly will and there's a spiritual will. Denethor was very strong of the world that we live in right now, which you might call the physical place that you can be selfish and you're caring about yourself and about the worldly things. And then there's a spiritual will, a will that's really aligned it completely differently, and not aligned with the world, but aligned with Eru, God, the harmony with the Ainulindaleth. Those kinds of things is really what's really strong all throughout Tolkien. Um, and so, if you've got a base alignment with Eru or his will or his plan or his harmony, the Ainulindala, which is a loose term for all of this, then what you really have in the end is kind of like a world versus Amon type of polarization to your spirit. And so I see will being modified by a stronger alignment. So, for example, let's say just for giggles, let's say your will is a B on a ABC like grades in school. Let's say your will is a B, and your spiritual alignment is non-existent or basically an F. Okay, you're not. It's like a modifier. You're not very aligned. You're willful here on Earth, but you're not really aligned in the ways that would make you impervious or resistant to things like things that you would see from Morgoth or Sauron through the Ring or the Palantir through his communication with you through the Palantir, and so you're going to be weaker. Now with Aragorn, not only does he have, I think, an earthly will, but it's not the majority aspect of his will. I think he is aligned, he is clean, he is in harmony, purity in that kind of a way. Yes, he trusts Gandalf, but Gandalf is not the end of the train station. Is not the end of the railroad here. It's that Gandalf is aligned with also the power of the universe, which is Eru. And so that's what they're both aligned with, and that's why they both see the same thing. And I think that those two things act as modifiers to one another. First being the world and how strong you actually are, and then how aligned to Amon and to the will of Eru you really are. Aragorn has enough. Aragorn has enough of both of those things to counter the temptations and the torture, the mental torture or whatever that Sauron is trying to bring to you, because Sauron is coming from that realm. He's not coming from the worldly realm. He's coming from a place. He's coming from the old place, if you want to call it, that. And in order to counter that, you've got to also be aligned with what you might call the old place. And so this is why I think he's got more power, much more power than Denethor, but only because we're looking at two different aspects of what power really is in Tolkien's paradigm.
So you've given me a lot to think about here, and I think you've definitely given the audience a lot to think about here, Matt. And I think what's interesting is that we can't conflate the usage of strength of will in relation to holding the ring to a fire to using the Palantir. I think that Sid is correct in the sense that strength of will is one of the aspects that you need to successfully use a Palantir in a safe manner, not like what Pippin did. Of course, Pippin didn't know what it was. He just thought it was something curious that he wasn't being told the information that he wanted. His questions weren't going to be answered by the adults, so he kind of took matters into his own hands, which had to happen as well. He's part of Iluvatar's plan just as much as Denethor or Aragorn or any of these guys. But what you've given me to think about here is that Gandalf states that it takes a great strength of will to hold the ring to fire, to view the writing on it. But he doesn't state that it takes great strength of will to use the Palantir, just that Denethor thought that strength of will was enough. And as Sid pointed out, there were other aspects of it. And as you pointed out, it may not even come into play nearly as much as Denethor thinks, that there are a lot of other things in play here about spirituality and being in tune with your Feyya, And I was thinking of the elvish telepathy, which is usually what people in Korra call it, but it is really just a word that the elves had called exchange of thought. And when reading about it in the history of Middle Earth and in the Parthethelian, not the Parthethelian, the Parma Eldalambran, Tolkien states that every person on the planet has the ability to exchange thoughts without words, including mortal men. It's just that elves are a little bit more in tune with this ability, and the Ainur are even more in tune with it than the elves. We get a little bit of Gandalf and Galadriel speaking to each other. Galadriel is able to speak to Boromir. She's able to speak to Sam. And most interestingly, I think, Frodo and Gandalf are able to be in communication with each other over a very great distance. And at a time that Frodo thought that Gandalf was even gone. And it happens twice, actually. Once in Bombadil's house and once on the Seat of Seeing. And I've written about this recently and how location absolutely helps. Holding magical objects absolutely helps. The Seat of Seeing, I would say that not anybody could just sit on it and see far. You had to have something magical with you, whether it was the Palantir or, in Frodo's case, the One Ring. But, of course, you also need the great strength of will to resist what might look back at you. And if Frodo doesn't possess that, and Gandalf knows that he doesn't possess that, so he sends that message through, take off the ring, you fool, take off the ring. And then finally that connection is severed, and thankfully Frodo isn't discovered, and more importantly, the ring isn't discovered by Sauron at that point, which would have spelled disaster right there in the first book, or I guess the second book of 6, we might say. Sid, I'm going to kick it back to you because you look like you have something to say.
Actually, two. One for the last thing you said. The Palantir is directional but doesn't have a distance meter. So Sauron knew that somewhere around or beyond the Anduin, in that direction, he felt the ring when it was at Amon Hen. And he thought it was at Amon Hen in the moment, but he wasn't sure. Now look what's in that line. There are 3 places in that line. Amon Hen, Minas Tirith, and the route Aragorn was taking in the hills south of Rohan. So it was one of the things that later fooled Sauron into thinking, okay, someone on that line had the ring. Aragorn showed up and beat me. Oh no, the heir of Isildur, Aragorn, the king destined to return, has the ring and has the sword that cut off my bleep bleep finger. And that's what got him so totally focused all the way to the Black Gate. The enemies in Minas Tirith have their, and then of course Aragorn showing up having stolen his Sauron's fleet of ships. Okay,
you know
all of that, and the king dying all on the same very bad day for Sauron.
Yeah,
all of that was a trap.
I don't mean to cut in, but I also thought of, you know what else is in that general direction, but even further away is Isengard. And Saruman had his part to play here, where part of that deception was also believing that Saruman had captured a hobbit at some point, and then sending a messenger there, because Sauron never actually goes anywhere anymore, and finding, no, there's no hobbit, there's no ring, there's not even a Palantir, and then suddenly this tall Númenórean guy with Barahir's ring and Elendil's sword and Celebrimbor's brooch is talking to him through the Palantir. It all comes down on him at once.
I want to jump in and say,
but a logical conclusion might have been, okay, Saruman did have the ring, but didn't have a very long chance to learn to use it. Gandalf and Aragorn showed up and beat the crap out of him, and that's where that's where Aragorn got the Palantir. That must be where Aragorn got the ring. And he could have thought along those lines. We don't know. But I wanted to mention one other thing from earlier. There's a big difference.
We'll get back to you, Matt. Go ahead, Sid.
Okay. There's a big difference between the Palantir and the ring in terms of one's own will. The ring itself has Sauron's mind. Gandalf goes so far as to say the ring is Sauron. So the ability to not put on the ring and the ability to perhaps use it oneself, except that is ultimately impossible for anyone safely, because you're face to face with Sauron every time it's close to you. So the ring is not neutral. The Palantiri are neutral, but if the guy at the other end is Sauron, then, and this is explicit, I was just rereading these passages for my next half hour. If Sauron has a Palantir, as he does, its neutrality plus your righteous use of it for Denethor is not enough. It's enough to use it, but it's not enough to keep you safe if someone with the mental strength of Sauron is using it. And the other thing I'll say is that there is an article by Tolkien in a very obscure journal, reprinted from his private papers, that talks about what Matt was saying. There are two levels of will or free will. One is limited, if my personal ego, let's call it, as we were talking about, someone with greater power can daunt me and leave me terrified. And we see that in Sauron and also in Saruman's voice. He daunted Wormtongue. For a while, he daunted Theoden. But there's another level of will, the spiritual will, which Aragorn activates. Gandalf, especially Gandalf the White, deeply serves. If we were talking Gollum against Sauron, Gollum, even as we know, had the power to be indomitable against Sauron. So it's a level where everyone has a core of freedom of will in relation to God. And if they stay with it, they're safe.
I'm going to pass it over to Matt, and just because he had something to say, but just to comment on Gollum specifically, I would state that when it comes to strength of will, nobody beats Gollum. You can't break him. He is completely indomitable, because of course he's afraid. He's afraid of a lot of things. He's afraid of Gandalf. He's afraid of Frodo. He's afraid of everything, and he's certainly very afraid of Sauron. But what's interesting here is that Sauron discovers that he can in no way dominate Gollum other than destroying him completely. Only his annihilation would overcome him. You could not make him into a slave or a puppet or a thrall or anything like that. It was just impossible because he was just that. I don't want to use the word arrogant. I think just
like corrupted.
No, I don't think it's a corruption. I just think that he's just that thick. He's just, I mean, because he is a hobbit, so that lends itself to it a little bit. But he's just so unbreakable. He's indomitable is the only word I guess that really works. Is that you couldn't get him to do something that you want him to do unless he also wants to do it. And it's one thing to be afraid of Sauron. It's another thing for him to openly display his hatred. He wouldn't cower like everybody else does in Sauron's presence, and he wouldn't boast like some of the great did. He's not a Luthien, but he would spit at him and hiss at him and curse at him, which nobody else has ever really done. But to kick it over to you, Matt, we have 4 minutes left in this segment. You had something to say.
Yeah. I'll start with Sauron being in the Palantir is the problem here. It doesn't take a lot of will, not a lot of will really, to use a Palantir. They were made for good purposes. They were accessed. The fear in the Legendarium was always that they would pass to the wrong hands. And when Sauron got his and then started making contact with people through it, you might as well just be standing right there in front of Sauron. That's the problem. So then you've got the issue of how your will and your spiritual power, your spiritual will, is going to resist the kind of spiritual power that's now facing you in Sauron. And all the Palantir does is just makes that takes that distance away and puts it right into your brain, right off. Um, the second thing is that um, the ring. What Ed said earlier is so absolutely perfect. He said a lot of brilliant things on him, and that is right, exactly perfect. There's some kind of thing with the alignment that Tolkien's writing into the legendarium, into the stories, where the ring alignment
Matt,
in Minas. Yeah,
you're cutting out a bit.
can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. There's some kind of alignment, exactly alignment. I did an article on this once where it showed that during this period of time, the where Sauron is fixated on the ring, there is an exact alignment between Cirith Ungol, when the hobbits are there, and using the ring. Sam is using the ring, and Osgiliath in Minas Tirith. They're actually all lined up exactly in the same bearing line. I do not think that's accidental. I think it reinforces the fact that Pippin and Aragorn had contact with Sauron in the Palantir. They were moving south because those two knights were not on the same night, so they were a southward movement. I agree with Sid that this is not range finding, but it's directional. So it's moving north to south the way that Sauron sees things, and on a couple different nights. And then all of a sudden, the ring gives him what I would call a ping, and it's lined up exactly with Cirith Ungol. Well, it couldn't be at Cirith Ungol according to Sauron. There's no way. And is it in the destroyed, occupied city of Osgiliath? No, that's not going to be there. But because it was moving north to south, is it now in Minas Tirith? And that's what made him freak. And the passages in the Lord of the Rings say that, and I studied this. It was within an hour, roughly. I mean, it was that late afternoon that Sauron gave the command to the Witch King to begin the siege of Minas Tirith. And that's not accidental. There is something lined up with that, and well planned by the way that Tolkien wrote it.
Okay. That's interesting. We are getting a little far away. There's only like a minute left. We're getting a little far away from the topic, though, which is willpower. I want to draw it back. I only have like a minute left, and I need to make my point.
Okay.
We need to draw back to willpower and get away from the whole bearing lines thing, because that's a completely different topic. Going back to the ring, Tolkien said in one of his letters that Frodo sort of failed from the get-go. That he had already sort of... He already wasn't able to destroy the ring from the moment that he agreed to take it. And nowhere is this more prevalent than in the idea of what Gandalf said, that it takes great strength of will to hold the ring to the fire. He does that, shows it to Frodo, gives it to Frodo. It's not even warmed up. It's safe to touch with his bare hands. And then when Frodo says, "I wish to see it destroyed," Gandalf sort of doubts that. And he says, "Go ahead, throw it in the fire." Frodo knows that won't work. It won't even warm it up, and he's unable to do it. He just has it in his hand, and he stares at it, and it looks so beautiful and so pretty to him that he can't do it. And that's time here. So I'll just wrap this up with final thoughts. So that is what I'm getting at. If the willpower isn't there to do that in Bag End with this small little fire, how could he possibly do it at Samath Naur? Going back to what we said, nobody has greater willpower than Gollum, and Gollum destroyed the ring.
Well, let me touch on Gollum.
Yeah,
real quick,
final thoughts.
Yeah, real quick. Sauron, Sauron's power is augmented in Gollum. From the dark side of things. He's made Gollum into a creature from the dark side, not from the good side. So he's seeing this indomitable will that's been put into him, and when he's speaking with Gollum, he's really freaked out by that. He's freaked out by this being basically in a hobbit form, and it freaks him out. Okay, and then my last point, and this is my main point because you just hit it right on, John. You're right, is that Frodo wanted to save the world. He was world focused, but Sam wanted to save goodness, and those two are not the same things. And that's why Sam had more of what you might call the Aina Lindula Eru mojo to the way he thought of things. In fact, in the books, Sam is the one who really was concerned with goodness left in the world, that kind of
Okay.
thing. And all Frodo really focused on was saving the Shire and saving the world as he knew it. And those are both noble, but they're not the same thing.
Final thoughts, Sid?
Just one where it says, although we know from the beginning Frodo could not throw the ring into the fire, it wasn't a failure. If you read
Oh, of course.
the Council of Elrond carefully, he was always told his job was to bring the ring to Mount Doom. In the explicit instructions given by Elrond at the council, no one ever said, well, what am I going to do when I get there? So, in many ways, it wasn't a failure. But actually, I'll talk about the same thing about Denethor.
Yes.
What is failure, and how did Denethor fail? And in my view, no. Why not? That's where we're going next.
Okay.
So, got my intro.
Okay, well, you are second. I'm going to give you 2 minutes here to just briefly intro your section here. So go ahead.
Most people think that Denethor failed in the end. But what is failure? In Tolkien, there are two types of failure. One is a failure of goodness, like Saruman becoming tempted by the ring, even though he didn't and never saw it, falling to the desire for power and the ego. Or like Wormtongue, so beaten down by Sauron, he completely forgot that he was good once. And Denethor didn't have either of those. Because we know that if a powerful being like Saruman or Sauron breaks your mind, you don't lose your salvation. Frodo's mind was broken, and nobody was upset with him. And Tolkien goes into length on that in the letters. I'm going to propose Denethor's mind was broken, but his spiritual will never was. And two, to the very end, what is the last legitimate order that Denethor gave? It was at Gandalf's suggestion. It was identical to what Theoden, a force will ride out against our enemies from Minas Tirith, or Theoden from Helm's Deep. Whether we live or die, we will fight to the end. The guy from Amroth, I'm forgetting his first name,
Imrahil.
did that. Imrahil from Amroth did that under Denethor's final orders, and it was part of the victory of saving Minas Tirith.
Okay.
Also, this is my last point. I know we're at time. Denethor used the Palantir to formulate the final defense of Minas Tirith, and Minas Tirith didn't fall. All of those credits go to Denethor. I'm going to say,
Okay. That's 2
never,
minutes.
He did not fail. I'm done.
Okay. All right. So interesting. I think that like when we view failure, we tend to look at final results, but we also tend to look at the type of person that we're talking about. And it is an unfortunate byproduct of the Peter Jackson films that people think of Denethor much worse than they should. Because I think the depiction of him was rather nasty, bordering on character assassination, really. Nobody was treated more poorly in that script than Denethor and his son Faramir as well. But at least Faramir got the chance for redemption, whereas everybody's cheering when Denethor died in the theater. So I think that like if we look at Denethor, just the literary character, he did a few things wrong. But that doesn't mean that he was a failure. I think that he succumbed to fear, and that is at the heart of what happened to him. He succumbed to fear. He believed that Sauron could not be overcome. And it's similar to what happened to Saruman, because Saruman too looked through the Palantir with good intentions and wound up face to face with Sauron and basically became so fearful that he believed that the only way that he was going to win was through subterfuge, which was not his job. And so he went off the proper path. Denethor didn't go off the proper path Other than, like the way that he treated Faramir a little bit. But I think that, as this people say, well, he was a coward, he didn't ride out to battle. The steward's not supposed to do that. The steward is forbidden from fighting in battles. He's there to sit and be there just in case the king dies. And when there's no king, they had a prince. You know what I mean? And that's Imrahil, as you mentioned. I think that, like, I do think you give him a lot of credit, but I'm curious to. I'm going to kick it to Matt, but I am curious as to how you view it, in the sense that, like, that he saved the city. You make it sound like he did it kind of single-handedly.
Oh, well, why don't we go to Matt first, and I'll
Okay.
reply to you, and
Okay. Go ahead.
and I'll both of you.
Okay.
So you guys have more.
Matt, go ahead.
I'd actually like to hear the argument for single-handedly first, actually.
Yeah, I that's why I said that. I kind of.
I didn't mean it that strongly. What I'm saying is, he was the steward of Gondor, and he saw his job to defend Gondor to the very end. And except for when his mind was literally broken, up until that very moment, he did that.
Do you think? Let me ask you a question. So, do you think that the moment that his mind was broken had anything to do with the Palantir, or was it seeing what happened to Faramir?
No, it was absolutely due to the Palantir. I've carefully reread 2 chapters, where it's all in just 2 chapters of the Return of the King. And it is clear. There's a moment when Denethor says, "I have sources of information other than you," and then he goes, and there's lights flashing up in the high tower, and he comes back aged 30 years. That was when he was broken. And in fact, one of the things that we know Sauron did in that moment is he showed the Black Fleet sailing up the Anduin. What he didn't show is that Aragorn was running the Black Fleet, which he didn't even know. He thought the ships were sailing their mine.
Yeah.
So Sauron was wrong, and he fooled Denethor, because you cannot lie through the Palantir, but if you're wrong, what you think can get shared. So basically, when he saw that, that was when his mind broke. The biggest error that Tolkien describes Denethor making was years earlier, and it was the same error of Boromir. And John, you alluded to it, and Matt, you acknowledged it. It was believing that one's own strength and one's own goals, even whether they're good goals or not, are what's crucial. So he said, I am the last defense of Gondor. Gondor is the last defense of Middle Earth. It all rides on me. In the same way that Boromir said, I'm the elder brother. I will take on the long, dangerous journey to Imladris, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was Denethor who gave the final decision, because both Faramir and Boromir wanted to go. But the dream came first and more to Faramir. But that was overridden by Denethor in support of Boromir in the ego weakness they both had. They're both of mixed Númenórean and local Gondor blood. And although Boromir looked like much more a man of Gondor than a man of Númenor, whereas
And
Faramir
was more like Númenor, yeah.
Númenor, as with Eric, but let me just finish the thought. One sentence.
Yeah.
In his despair, ever since his wife's death, Denethor favored Boromir and favored human, earthly strength of will and strength and battlefield courage, and all of that was what made him vulnerable to Sauron's attack, but never to siding with Sauron the way Saruman was considering doing. And
Well,
so that was his courage that left him ultimately unstained, as Boromir
yeah.
was ultimately unstained, even though he fell to the ring. All yours.
Two things before I pop it over to Matt. One is, I don't think that Saruman ever actually planned on joining Sauron. He wanted Sauron to believe that he was joining him when his whole plan was to usurp him. And of course, as you pointed out, you can't really lie through a Palantir, and especially not to such an accomplished liar as Sauron, who didn't believe Saruman for a second, but allowed him to do his dirty work for him anyway. The other thing, as you mentioned, is that Boromir and Denethor are very similar, even though Denethor and Faramir are also very similar in some ways. Boromir, I think, takes after his mother, but they're similar in this thought that I'm the last line of defense, as you said. I'm the guy holding it all together. We hear it from Boromir all throughout Book 2, and how men of Gondor, you wizards and you elves in your ivory towers, you're not really doing anything. And it's interesting when Gandalf finally claps back at this and gives that famous line, "For I am a steward too, did you not know?" Okay, Matt, your thoughts on this? Matt, we're not hearing you.
Oh,
there we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I agree with where Sid's going with this. The reason that Denethor has such an affinity for Boromir is because they're both world-minded, and Faramir just isn't his boogie, and that's why Faramir also has a feeling of connection with Sam and Frodo, for the most part. And so when Denethor talks about saving his stewardship and his responsibility for Minas Tirith and the West and all that, he's thinking of this in the worldly terms, and he's correct. The problem is, once again, the problem is for everybody, is that Sauron's got a Palantir. And so you might as well have just been transported in a time machine or a teleporter right into his throne room, so he can look at you and talk to you right in front of your face. And if you're a captured audience and you're looking in the Palantir and you're talking to Sauron and you're of this world like Denethor is, you don't have any hope. You have no hope. You are already dead to rights at that point, and that's where he was corrupted in his mind, the way he thought of things, and the rest was history, as they say. So I agree with where Sid's going with this completely. I agree with both of you guys. I'm just saying that my particular aspect of this is just that there's a two side to this power thing. There's of this world and there's of the spiritual world, and how are you aligned will determine how powerful you are as a combination for both of those.
Yeah, I agree fully. I think that, like, my big takeaway from this is that we all enjoyed the Peter Jackson films that I mentioned earlier, but I hope that at some point in our lifetimes we get to see some sort of alternate take on it, some sort of remake that treats the character of Denethor with a lot more respect, I think, and doesn't basically make him out to be this sort of weak-willed, lily-livered, character that's just sort of getting in the way of the real heroes, whether it's Faramir or Aragorn or Gandalf. People shouldn't be clapping when Denethor dies. They should feel the way that Gandalf felt.
I agree with you, John. One of my big, I would say my top 20 things I would have changed was I would have had a Palantir scene with Denethor to show he was also more of a victim than even Saruman was, but he was truly a victim, actually.
Yeah, and I think that, people didn't understand why he was so suspicious and everything, and it had to do a lot with the fact that he picked up that Palantir when he was very young, and he was using it when all of the wise told him it's not a good idea because they don't know. I mean, that's the Ithil. The Anor stone that he's using, the Ithil stone. Yeah, it was in Minas Ithil, and Minas Ithil is fallen. We can't assume that it was destroyed. We must assume that it's fallen into the hands of the enemy. And I don't know whether Denethor thought otherwise, or whether he thought that Sauron wasn't going to figure this ball out, or, as Gandalf says, he trusted in his own strength of will a little bit too much. But he was using it to spy. I mean, when Aragorn was young and he came to the south, he fought in the armies of Gondor and Rohan. He called himself Thorongil. And in the appendix, I think it's Appendix B, that talks about Thorongil, it never outright says that it's Aragorn, but you're meant to draw that conclusion. And it says that everybody in Gondor liked Thorongil except for Denethor, because he believed that he was a usurper there to take the throne and an agent of Mithrandir, which is Gandalf. One of the big mistakes that Gandalf made was telling Pippin not to speak to Denethor. Not because it's Gandalf not trusting Pippin to say the right thing or whatever, but because Denethor is watching them with the Palantir. He knew about that. He knew that he told Pippin not to say anything. And of course, Pippin couldn't help himself, you know. So, like, that was Gandalf making a bit of a tactical error. But of course, like I said, it all kind of works out, you know, the way that Iluvatar wants it to.
Real quick, in the movie, he says, he goes out of the way to tell the audience, we don't, cover that thing up. We don't know who else who might be watching.
Yeah.
And so Peter Jackson was careful to put that in there to show that how ominous of a danger that is, but then didn't remember to put that in related to Denethor, which is exactly what he's talking about. We don't know who else is watching.
Maybe you guys would remember better than I would, but do they ever even show or allude to the fact that Denethor had a Palantir in the movie?
No.
I don't think they did.
No cut scenes either.
Was he holding it when he was burned to death?
No, because he ran out. He wasn't holding anything, and he leaped off of Minas Tirith. Okay. Yeah.
That ruins a great scene.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Holding the Palantir, and then forever after, the only thing anybody except someone stronger than Aragorn could see through it would be burning hands.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, wait, one sec, Matt. I'll get back to you in a second. One of the mentions of the phrase strength of will was specifically mentioned that it took a great strength of will to see beyond the burning hands, which makes me think of the whole idea of a train wreck, of seeing something terrible before your eyes and having the will to look away. I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, yeah. So I was just going to say, that scene where they walk into the throne room and he is there sitting on the chair with the broken horn on his lap. That scene could have been preceded by that horn being in his hand or on the chair there, and scene starting with Denethor in his own cloakroom off to the side where the Palantir is, just putting the cover on the Palantir, indicating that he just had a conversation with we all know who at that point, and he walks out to pick that up or has it in his hand and then talk to Gandalf. This would not have taken more than 10 seconds to allude to the fact that Denethor was compromised, and it slipped through the weeds, but I never saw any cut footage on it or discussion of it. So I think it literally was an accident.
Sid?
You guys have said a whole lot of things since I spoke last. Let me cover some. John, you and I disagree on one point about Saruman. I believe the conversation between Gandalf and Saruman is being utterly honest when he says both two contradictory things. Maybe we can get the ring and fight Saruman. Maybe we can pretend to serve him and make him more gentle. But pretending to serve him might mean serving him for centuries. So I really think that Saruman's mind was destroyed by Sauron in splitting it, so that Saruman didn't even know if he was going to end up joining Sauron or fighting against him. Whereas it is explicit that Sauron could not do that with Denethor. Nothing Sauron could do could stop Denethor from trying to defending Minas Tirith and Gondor.
two
All he
things.
could do was.
Two.
Let me finish, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished.
The only thing he could do to Denethor was despair. He could never break his will or his intent. And that's one of the things where Denethor was in right alignment. He was going to fulfill his stewardship and save Gondor if he could. He just thought it was his personal job. That was the error of ego that made him weak.
Well, yeah, he thinks he's in charge of the world. Two things. One is that I think the difference between Sauron and Saruman, in a way, in the Third Age, is a lot like Sauron was in the First Age. He thinks he's the good guy. Whereas I think Sauron, after the fall of Numenor, kind of owned it. You know, he knew he was the bad guy. He knew he was evil at this point. He kind of embraced it.
All he had to do was look in the mirror.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that I find that you just sort of tickled my brain with is there is a thing in Tolkien's works that we could see as the virtue of stubbornness. And Denethor, obviously very stubborn. Boromir, stubborn. Gollum, who's more stubborn than Gollum. And Sam is a rather stubborn fellow, too. You know, and we see that sometimes stubbornness just sort of wins.
Yeah. And it does win, especially when there's that deeper connection to Eru underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes it indomitable. I think Eru likes stubborn people. There's a lot of evidence for that story.
Well,
especially when they're on his side.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the most stubborn of them all was Feanor, and that didn't turn out so great. But there, in the Lord of the Rings specifically, you see a lot of instances where the good guys who are stubborn wind up doing something great, like, you know, for example, Boromir fighting basically to his last breath to defend Merry and Pippin.
Think of Galadriel's long.
She was obstinate, yes.
Yeah, and Sauron. So she was stubbornly so deep on the good side that she was almost unbearable to anyone evil.
And the dwarves are rather stubborn beings as well. Yeah. You know, to the fact where Sauron never managed to get any dwarves on his side. Morgoth would just pay them and manage to get a few dwarves, but not many.
Hey, John, I want to pick a really...
Wait, hold on. You're both talking at the same time. Sid, finish up, and then I want to kick it over to Matt.
No, I'd like to keep the topic on Denethor, and I'd like to have a chance to get at least my third of the total time. I'm way behind you guys.
Okay.
Please.
Well, Matt has something to say to me. Let me just hear what it is. I'm pointing in the wrong direction.
Oh, I just wanted to quickly say that your comment about Feanor, I don't necessarily agree with. I think it might have worked out really well, because if he hadn't been so stubborn and so upset, he would have never left. And if he would have never left, do you know how much ravaging Morgoth would have done in Middle-earth without the Valar doing anything? It might have been even longer. It might have been 89 billion years without Feanor having made a scene about the situation. That's all I had to say about it.
Well, I mean, there's 2 points where his stubbornness shapes the story. You're talking about the later one. I'm talking about the earlier one having to do with the Silmarils. Okay, Sid, go ahead. You want to continue on your third point here about Denethor?
Yeah. So the thing, coming back to Denethor, there's a tremendous parallel of Theoden and Éomer and Denethor and Faramir. The changing of an age requires almost the death of the Elder King. Now, of course, there is no Elder King in Aragorn's case, so that's not a problem. But the Elder Steward and the Elder King of Rohan are meant for the Third Age. And so the question more is, how do they die? And Theoden very clearly is utterly trapped and poisoned by Saruman, rescued by Gandalf, and dies heroically. But not much of a battle guy. He rides in and his horse kills him. Okay. Now take a look at Denethor. He's standing there alone. And I think that line you mentioned of "I too am a steward" was an incredibly powerful and effective medicine. It was for Denethor the best that he could do for it was for Gandalf the best he could do for Denethor. For Theoden, who was falsely imprisoned, uh, Gandalf could use the power of Narya and break Sauron and Wormtongue's spell and truly free him. Denethor, because of his egoistic opposition to Mithrandir and Thorngil Aragorn, had to go. But even so, the message, "I too am a steward," acknowledges you're a steward, go act like one. And Denethor does that to the very end. And as we talked about earlier, it was an essential part of building and maintaining the deception. And as for the point about telling Pippin to say very little to Denethor, that was essential because Gandalf knew or assumed the Palantir, and it's like if Denethor figures out where the ring is and goes upstairs and looks in the Palantir, it's all over.
Who knows what he might give up accidentally?
Exactly. Because there are basically all Sauron ever needed was a clue that he was wrong about where the ring was. A tiny clue would have been enough. And Pippin does let things slip. He lets little rocks slip down to the bottom of a well and awaken a Balrog. He lets his curiosity slip and he picks up a Palantir. That's the nature, to me, of Pippin as a young, ultimately wise man. Wise men get wise because they stay foolish too long. And so that is what, and really Pippin, think how much Pippin grows in that hour, as Gandalf describes it, between two nasty old men. But I really believe that in those two chapters, the first chapter of that section and the Pyre of Denethor, an incredible battle between Denethor and Sauron. And one of the points about the nature of the battle, I believe that Denethor fully understood the history of the 1,000-year-long war with plagues and skirmish attacks that led to the fall, the Kinstrife, the fall of Osgiliath. He knew that he was at the tail end of a 1,000-year war. He didn't understand eucatastrophe because only people with faith can understand eucatastrophe. He didn't understand that the very fact everything was getting darker was, in a paradoxical way, good news.
The darkest hour before dawn is the idiom here.
Exactly.
I want to.
Let me just say, he failed to despair, but he did not fail to a point of loss of his soul, and he was part of Eru's plan. Therefore, I call this the victory of Denethor. And by the way, this conversation is part of my writing it, and I will sell movie rights for a reasonable rate.
The Lord of the Rings, the victory of Denethor.
Yeah.
Interestingly, okay, I have a few things to mention here, but earlier when we were speaking, you were saying, during your time, if the conversation lulls, can I? And I'm thinking, when is the conversation ever going to lull between us three? It never happens.
Good point.
The interaction between Gandalf and Denethor, we mentioned the, I'm a steward line. And what's interesting is that the ever-witty Denethor, who always has a quip, doesn't really say anything back to him, which is the closest that Gandalf is ever going to get to any kind of apology there. The other thing is there's another interaction between them. It just slipped out of my mind. Dang it. That's why I was trying to say it like real quick before it slipped out of my mind. It wasn't about the Palantir. I'll say something if I can come up with it. Matt, why don't you?
Let me. And John, feel free to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you come up with it. I was just going to say that the Palantir coming to um, I'm sorry, the fact that the Palantir was in Minas Tirith and the ring was out there, um, meant that Sauron trusted that it was going to go to Minas Tirith. He believed that it would get to men at some point, that it would go to Minas Tirith at some point, that Sauron was looking for it, and all this kind of stuff. And he had no idea, obviously, no idea it was going to come back to them to Mount Doom and be destroyed. But having Denethor with a Palantir is very smart, and very very fortuitous for Sauron, because this is where everybody wanted to take it. Everybody wanted to take it. Denethor wanted it. Boromir wanted it. Anybody else around
I
besides
just remembered.
the Fellowship wanted it there. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I won't forget. Go ahead. I promise I won't forget.
So yeah, I was just going to say that I think where Sid's going with this is, yes, he was being faithful to what his job was as a steward here on Earth, but he was hopelessly corrupted, not able to really fulfill his duty at that point, and was just being played by Sauron and the whole time, and he knew what was going on in general, and so that's it.
Okay, the thought that I had, and it had to do with the interactions between Gandalf and Denethor, and this one had to do with the One Ring. And of course, Denethor is a guy that doesn't fully understand what the One Ring is, just like Boromir didn't understand what the One Ring is. Faramir was wise enough to admit that he didn't understand it and therefore would not touch it, which was one of the wisest things that any man of Gondor has ever said. But Denethor is a lot like Saruman in one way, and like First Age Sauron. He thinks he's the big good and that he's the last line of defense and that everything hinges on him, to the point where he basically says to Gandalf, "Why didn't you bring me the ring?" And Gandalf says something like, "I would have if I would have trusted you with it. But don't get angry. I don't trust myself with it either."
Yeah, and actually, there's another part of that same conversation. If Boromir had gotten the ring, he would have brought it to me, Denethor declares. Mm-hmm. And in the same paragraph you were already talking about, Gandalf says no. If Boromir had gotten the ring, it would have driven him mad, and when he came to Minas Tirith, you would not have known your own son, implying Boromir then would have killed Denethor, declared himself king of Gondor, and fought the war. He wanted to do the same thing Denethor would have done, and less wisely. But nobody ever said, "Hey, you rule the ring. I'll give you the ring so you can rule the world." Nobody could ever do that.
Yeah. And
I got a point to make about Isildur.
One second, Matt. One second,
okay.
Matt. I just to reply to Sid there. And Boromir told Frodo all that, what he would do with the ring. And then once the ring was gone and Frodo left, he came to his senses and he snapped back into reality. But that's how crazy you get around something like that. Go ahead, Matt. We have 90 seconds here.
I need to say one. Boromir also said it at the Council of Elrond. Mm-hmm. So Boromir had a monomania. He even said, "We have the courage, we have the strength. All we need is a weapon. And here, you're handing us a weapon." And basically, the ring latched onto that monomania. Of all the 9, he said, Boromir's the one I can crack because he's a monomaniac with an ego the size of Gondor to begin with. Mm-hmm. And Denethor was similar, but always opposed to Sauron.
Matt?
Well, in the passages in the Gladden Fields, Isildur is quoted as saying that he dreaded touching the ring and putting it on because it burnt him. It was too hot. He was too painful.
He didn't say it was hot. He said it gave him pain.
Well, it gave him pain as though it was some kind of spiritual burning to his.
Because Isildur tried to master the ring. He tried to actually use it, and the ring fought back. It did the same thing to Gollum.
That's right. Yeah, and it did. And I think it's because those two beings were what you might call of this world. They were into power. They wanted power for themselves. That's why Isildur couldn't destroy it. That's why he told Elrond to go pound sand, and so it had a bad effect on him. But with but with Frodo and Bilbo and Sam, it didn't have that effect because they were not just
Okay.
of this world.
Time. Okay.
And they were
Final
not
thoughts,
destroying.
Sid, you first. Final thoughts.
Okay, Father. As I always like to do to all of our listeners, what do you have to learn for yourself from Denethor's struggles? Where's your ego? Is your ego selfish, or is your mind a servant, whether a servant to preserve the garden of the Shire, uh, or to go back and live in the Shire, Frodo or Sam? Uh, are you willing to be take God out of the picture for a moment, to be at one with the harmony of the universe and in peace? And there's a saying from the guy who invented Aikido. He was undefeatable for 25 years because he was at one with the universe. So if you wanted to fight him, you had to break off from the whole universe.
Okay, it took me
That's
way
like,
longer than it should to realize that you said Aikido. I misheard it, and I thought you said IKEA, and I'm wondering what the heck furniture has to do with any of this.
Oh, everything.
no, I said Aikido, and so we're talking about utterly peaceful, even if you're a warrior.
Yeah.
And in that spirit, look at yourself, please.
My final thought.
And come look at my story on Archive of Our Own. I'll
Yep.
let you know when I post it.
Okay. My final thought here, just to respond to something that Matt said, Isildur and Gollum had something in common in that the ring harmed them in a very direct way to distance itself from them. But there's a big difference. Isildur was smart. He tried to use the ring, and at one point he realized Elrond was right. I got to get it back to him. And the ring's like, I'm not sticking around for that. With Gollum, he didn't desire power. He just desired the ring. He was the thing that was the creepiest to Sauron. This guy who would hold the most powerful object in all of Middle-earth and just look at it and play with it.
It's mine.
Yeah. He wished to possess it, but he had no idea to use it. He didn't want Sauron to have it.
No, to possess it and hide.
Yeah.
Now that's why he was chosen by Eru, because the ring got found by Deagle and Smeagol the very moment that Sauron got solidly embodied a few miles away from the Gladden Fields, and really was powerful enough to start looking.
Yeah. Okay, Matt, final thoughts?
Underneath
Yeah.
the Misty Mountains.
I want to say that something really interesting has been, pulled out of the ground on this topic. It seems to me that we are hovering around this concept that the ring tried to block Isildur's power lust because he was interested in power. In other words, if you're in the ring for power, not for just the ring itself like Gollum was, but if you're in the ring for power and you're a powerful person and you want to use this for power, I'm going to make this really uncomfortable for you to bear to the point where you can't bear it and wield that power against me. It's an aspect of the curse or the enchantment in the ring that has that effect against somebody who's actually possibly going to use it for power and then resist Sauron with that power.
I'll tell you where I disagree on that. I'll get to you in a second, Sid. Let me just reply here. I don't think that it would do that to anybody. It wouldn't have done that to Galadriel because Galadriel would have walked right over to Mordor and attacked Sauron with it. And, much to her detriment if she did that. I think the thing is that in trying to actually use the ring, Isildur was also trying to use it for good, which we know is not possible. And I think it became a contest of wills between the two that ended in a stalemate. The ring couldn't corrupt him, and he couldn't overcome the ring.
Which is why Galadriel also couldn't use it for good.
Well,
would have failed.
But she was wise enough not to try.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
A couple of things on this. Tolkien talks about this in a simple and straightforward way. At every decade, since the Sauron lost the ring has had one purpose or another. When Sauron was not yet reformed, its purpose was to hide. Isildur wasn't going to let it hide, so not only did it get him killed, it got him killed while he was swimming a river, so the ring could go lie in the mud. Then we go fast forward all the way to Gollum, and the ring senses Sauron nearby and wants to be found, hoping that someone will grab it, do something nasty with it, and Sauron will get a clue. But Eru trumps the ring with
Bilbo
by Gollum under the Misty Mountains. Then, as each character encounters the ring, if the ring wants to hide, well, okay, Bilbo hid the ring. Well, unfortunately for Sauron, even Sauron couldn't find it. That was Eru's work.
We're getting
Frodo
off.
Frodo handles his misfortune well. So I'll come back. Did Denethor handle his misfortune well? I'll say yes.
I'll say yes and no to that, to be honest. I think he did in some ways, in some other ways not so much. But we got to get over to Matt's section. But before we do that, I have to take a very brief bathroom break. So I'm going to go over here. I'll be right back, guys. I have to go. I'll be right back.
Me too. Right.
So I can talk about whatever I want to now, huh?
You can talk about us.
Well, while they're doing that, I will just say what I was going to say. Maybe I'll say when they come back anyway. But
Okay, I'm back here. Are we all back?
What was the last thing you said? No. What was the last thing you said, John?
About what?
Before we got up. It prompted an idea in my mind about what you said.
Gollum?
Yeah. No, the last topic. The last comment you said.
I was just saying that, Gollum and Isildur, they have the one thing in common, that the ring harmed them directly. The word that Tolkien used was that it galled Gollum, and that's why he wasn't wearing it all the time or even keeping it in his pocket. It was distancing itself from him. All right, Sid's back.
Yeah.
Let's go back over here.
One quick thing about what you're just saying. If you want to see what ultimately happened to every ring bearer ever, go out to Archive of Our Own, Sid Kemp, and read Remembrances of All Things. It's about what happens when the ring bearers all meet up at the end of time.
Okay, so I'm going to set the timer here for 2 minutes. And Matt, you are going to... Why won't this work? Here we go. Matt, go ahead and do your brief intro of describing what your section's going to be.
Well, what I'm going to do tonight is a reading, and it's going to come out of the Silmarillion, Beren and Luthien, and it's going to be related to the scene in the throne room. And that we've read it before, we've all know the scene, but the aspect of the question I have for our council meeting tonight to try to arrive at basically a decision on something, which is I've answered questions like this before online, and I use this scene as perhaps I believe to be the most powerful spell enchantment ever cast by any character in the Legendarium from a character that's in Middle Earth and originated by that person. In other words, it's not from an overriding enchantment over everything like life or the Ainulindala or any kind of outside inward spell. I'm talking about in-world, character in-world, cast, how powerful it is. And I believe that this spell that she casts on Morgoth to be the most powerful spell ever cast. And I'm kind of looking for some just conversation about that and whether there's a head nod, yes or no, about whether there's enough evidence to say, yeah, that's probably the most powerful one, or if no, if not, which one is and why not.
Okay, and I'm going to set us up for a half hour here. Okay, go ahead, Matt. Why don't you start?
Okay, this is going to come from, again, the throne room scene. Beren and Luthien have gone through the gate. She's already raised her hand and told the mightiest werewolf of Morgoth to fall asleep. And according to the Silmarillion, he's actually smitten down like he'd been struck by lightning, and he's down, and she and Beren are actually able to walk in, and they descend down the famous labyrinthine stairs, and they get all the way to the bottom, and they enter the throne room. Now, when they enter, the spell that she had cast earlier on everybody while she is in there and already cast a spell on Karkaroth has already taken effect. And this is how the paragraph starts. All his court were cast down in slumber, and all the fires faded and were quenched. The Silmarils in the crown on Morgoth's head blazed forth suddenly, the radiance of white flame, and the burden of that crown and of the jewels bowed down his head, as though the world were set upon it, laden with the weight of care, of fear, and of desire, that even the will of Morgoth could not support. Then Luthien, catching up her winged robe, sprang into the air, and her voice came dropping down like rain into pools, profound and dark. She cast her cloak.
Matt.
We lost you. Oh, we got cut off.
You were the last thing I heard was casting down, and then you went blank there.
Oh.
Started leapt into the air.
Yeah, do that.
Then Luthien, catching up her winged robe, sprang into the air, and her voice came dropping down like rain into pools, profound and dark. She cast her cloak before his eyes, and set upon him a dream, dark as the outer void, where once he walked alone. Suddenly he fell, as a hill sliding in avalanche, and hurled like thunder from his throne, lay prone upon the floors of hell. The iron crown rolled echoing from his head, and all things were still. Now, she motions for Beren to then go ahead and cut the Silmaril from the
Iron crown
that's rolling across the ground, but the weight of this spell has everybody asleep. All the orcs throughout the whole hall, the Balrogs, dragons, the other werewolves and other beasts that are there. We know they're there with him. That's where they all are in that area. And Morgoth himself is drooling on the floor in La La Land. And for a spell to put this number of people asleep at one time is about as massive as I can think of in the middle world setting here. And I'm wondering what you guys think about it. And
question: do you think that Sauron was present as well?
If he was also asleep and unable to stop it.
Well, everybody that was there. I mean, it says his court,
yeah,
and we're sort of it's left to our imagination what's there. Certainly, orcs and trolls and Balrogs, but do we think that Sauron was there?
Well, Sauron is one of those kind of guys. I think it's a good question, John. If he's there, if all the Balrogs are down and the dragons are down, Sauron's down.
Oh,
Okay,
they're right. Yeah.
Morgoth is down, Sauron's down. So yeah, Morgoth's down, Sauron's down. But if he's not there, and sometimes, a lot of times he is really what you would call a field. He is a lot
Doing
of
his
times
own
out
thing a
and
lot of
not
times.
there.
Yeah.
He's doing his own thing and doing things for Morgoth out because Morgoth needed to leave. So Sauron had no problem leaving. He was all over the place. And so I guess the point is I think he was probably a field. That's what I think. But if he was there, he had no chance of resisting this either.
Sid had something to say there real quick before we continue.
I have two things to say. And John, Matt, the second one will be my direct answer to your question. The first is not about the strength, but the imagery. And I see two qualities. One is the other character who raises his hand and light blazes, and in that situation it is fully powerful, is Gandalf the White. So I believe that kind of imagery is being echoed as the greatest magic possible, and the magic that is always victorious. Perhaps it is the fire of Anor, of which Gandalf says he's a secret wielder. Mm-hmm. Number two is every part of the spell is utterly truthful. The nightmare she casts on Morgoth is simply a mirror showing him who he is, and he can't bear it. And so it's the power of light and the power of truth, and in the context of Tolkien's mythos, yes, the most powerful ever. But I can go a little further. I think it was the most powerful spell in Middle-earth, of Middle-earth. But remember that Middle-earth is the prehistory of the world we live in today. Has anyone, not only in Tolkien's work, but in any work, done better? I can think of only one case. There was a guy who lived about 2,000 years ago and had a bad day the same way Gandalf did. His body was destroyed. And he went down to the depths of hell, like Luthien, and he managed to take over hell and pull every good soul out and take them up to heaven. It's called the harrowing of hell, and the guy who did it was a guy named Yeshua. We call him Jesus. And I'm going to suggest that's the only spell we know of in the history of either Middle-earth or the world we live in that ever was greater than Luthien. That's my answer.
My answer
I'll take that as a yes on the Luthien thing.
I would surmise that's definitely a yes there. Mine would be both a yes and a no, because I think that there's a lot of different types of magic, and I think when it comes into, like, I don't think Tolkien concerned himself with power in that sense of comparative power. Sometimes it would be this one's greater than that one, or this one's wiser than that one. But it was always really, what could you do in the situation that you have? And in this case, Luthien basically carries the whole thing. Beren had already tried to do this once before. He failed pretty miserably, got himself captured by Sauron. Finrod wound up dying. It was a whole thing. In this case, she's like, okay, this time we go together. But I think that in terms of sheer, it's the greatest attack, I would say. The greatest attack that's ever happened, because it is an attack. She's taking these horrible creatures that would love to just rip her and Beren apart at a moment's notice and just completely just put them down. And her magic is targeted because it only strikes the ones that she wants it to strike. It doesn't strike Beren, for instance. He's not affected by this. So that's also very important to mention. As for the greatest magic, I think Luthien's mother Melian, it deserves a mention here. The Girdle of Melian is an extremely powerful spell. And of course, Melian was almost like an unbound version of Gandalf. She was his former boss. I think that Melian, there's two instances. One is the Girdle of Melian. The other is, okay, now we're all in agreement here that elves are immortal but essentially human, right? Mm-hmm. Elves need to eat. Elves need to drink water. Elves need to sleep. But when Eleuthingel meets Melian in the forest and touches her hand. He stands with her in the same place for centuries without moving. And in that time, he does not eat, he does not sleep, he does not drink water, he does not bathe, he just stares at his beloved for centuries as the forest grows around them. That, to me, is the most powerful magic scene in Middle-earth.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, I'm going to say real quick, Sid, I'm going to say that going back to a couple episodes ago, we talked about the difference between enchantment and spells, and I still believe there's a little bit of a difference. Now, Melian's girdle is definitely an overriding, constant, 24/7, 365 enchantment. It just exudes, it's placed, it sits, it just is because she wills it to be there and constant. I agree with that to that degree. It's the most powerful enchantment for sure. But I'm talking about what I might call a single casted spell for a particular purpose right now, like a deliberate right now spell is kind of where I'm going with this. Although I do agree with what you're saying about the enchantment part of it.
Well, I don't agree.
I
don't agree with the usage of the term enchantment. I just have to put that out there again too.
That's fine. I've always thought that's fine. We talked about it before. I think enchantments are generally exuded and placed.
They're
and
spoken.
Spells,
They're spoken.
Can be, and spells can be much more directive and maybe sometimes more offensively oriented. Like the difference between the girdle and this particular spell here, there is a difference. And before I give this to Sid, I'll just say that Linda and whatever she channels is basically a love song. Yes, it's reflective. Yes, it's dangerous and terrible for the evil forces to listen to, but it's love songs that always change the world. It's love songs that really have changing power to the world. And what she's singing is from what you might call that deep place. And I just want to put that out there before I hand it over to Sid.
Agree entirely. I think there's another potential language for describing this difference. And I think, Matt, you'll like me bringing it up. I think the key distinction is momentary action versus long-lasting effect. Another key distinction is offense or defense.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go off to a completely different philosophy and bring in the original meaning of Taoism, both attack and momentary are yang, and long-lasting and defensive and absorptive and receptive are yin.
I see why you said he would like this.
So I'm going to suggest that the most powerful yang spell in all of Middle-earth is Luthien, and one of the most powerful yin enchantment, call it whatever you will, yin magical enactions is the Girdle of Melian. Yeah. But also you have some others, obviously Galadriel, learning from Melian, protected Lothlorien, but also a different one because it's Elvish entirely as opposed to Maya influence. What was the name of the kingdom that stayed hidden all through the First Age?
Gondolin.
So the hiding of Gondolin by its king and its leaders, very similar, masculine, not feminine, so different in that way. But again, hiding and preservation. I don't think we can compare the strength of one type of thing to the strength of the other. But there are also these profoundly strong hiding spells. Melian, Gondolin, Lothlorien in the Second and Third Ages. And it's a completely different type of power. And a Taoist like me would say it's a yin power of absorbing and preserving, not a yang power of directing and attacking.
I think that I think that Gondolin is interesting because they were kind of just hiding in plain sight. They were so close to where Morgoth was that he overlooked them. The crucigram was right there. And I think it was just a matter of not knowing where it was. But there is a difference in order of magnitude between what Galadriel did and what Melian did, because Melian did it through her own natural ability, whereas Galadriel used implements. She used the Elisar and she used the Ring of Power.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, they're not the same. I mean, elves and Maya are not the
Yeah.
same. But let me go back to something real quick that Sid just said about the Gondolin. Uh, Sid, you are right though about that. It is a yang power. You know why? Because it was built of the earth by the builders that were basically male. They were the male elves that that chunked this out and made
It's
these
Targon.
passageways and the gate and the gates, and they built the city. Yes, we all know that the mothers of this society were all super helpful and influential on this, but it was a Yang type project, if you want to call it that, and it wasn't being protected by any magic. It was being protected basically by the eagles who would help them take out anybody who got close, and the fact that it was so well hidden because of the construction project. And so I just wanted to make that clarifying point.
I agree, but two notes about that. In Taoism, earth is yin. Earth is the ultimate yin. So
Yeah.
their own actions of building, shaping the earth is yang, but
Mm-hmm.
being contained in the earth is yin.
That's true. They're
And
shaping yin. Yeah.
eagles,
Yeah.
on the other hand, are air and distant vision. An eagle is a symbol of great yang. So protected by yang, enclosed by yin
Yeah.
for long preservation. And then there's the
Yep.
great mystery of all, which is Melion and Ungoliant and other spiders and Luthien all weave webs. And webs are deceitful. So the use of deceit and webs is a fascinating piece, all the way from Ungoliant to the spiders that Bilbo fought and Shelob, and all the way from Melion to Luthien.
We've talked before about the power of deception as well, and deception is incredibly important in this passage that Matt has read, not just of Luthien casting dreams on these characters and making them believe things that they don't, that aren't true or that could be true, but Beren taking the form of a werewolf as well and being able to just not be noticed at all. Morgoth is of course fixated on Luthien because he's got this lustful gaze, but there are a lot of guys in that room, and the fact that nobody has noticed Beren speaks to the efficacy of his disguise. So you see the yin yang here, whereas in this case Luthien is the yang. She's doing the attacking, while Beren is doing the hiding.
Yeah, John, that's a great point. Luthien is doing a lot of juggling here with a lot of power. She's making him cloaked or a believable werewolf as he comes in, because all he has on him is just a pelt, but she makes it look like he is actually a werewolf coming in on four legs. She's managing that, and she's also, and like you said, I mean, there's probably 100 people or 100 beings in this room, and that's crazy. But here's my last point for this little part here, and then I'll give it to Sid. In the next two paragraphs down, it says when they were leaving, they come in contact with Karkaroth, who's now awake. And this passage goes to the point about exuding things and being and taking advantage of its opportunities and songs, and actually spells being cast. And this is what it says. She couldn't deal with him, with Karkaroth, and it says here, Luthien was spent, and she had no time or strength to quell the wolf. So whatever spell she's been casting took what you might call battery power. There was actually an exuded spell cast that took a massive amount of energy. Gandalf suffered this a couple of times also, where he was just spent, especially when he was dealing with the Balrog in Moria with the counterlocking spells between the Balrog and him, and he said he's just exhausted from dealing with this Balrog. But it says it again here, and so there is a strength diminishment coming from a casted spell. From a good person, that spells aren't always, about evil things. I don't believe that, especially with Tolkien. But I just wanted to point out that there's these nuggets being jarred loose by this conversation. And I think it's just kind of cool.
And I think that you hit on something really important here about the giving of energy and the expanding of energy. And that's why I differentiate between the greatest attack and the greatest magic. This is certainly what you've described as certainly the greatest attack. It is. I mean, it's not just an attack on Morgoth, the mightiest of the Valar, the second most powerful being in the universe, who goes, for a nice little nap because Luthien did something. It's the greatest attack. It's not only hitting him, it's hitting these Balrogs and these trolls and these orcs and whatever, werewolves, vampires, possibly Sauron as well. And also, as I mentioned earlier, targeted, not hitting Beren, only hitting who she wants it to hit. And of course, it expends her energy. She's weary. And then when the first thing that she casts down is the first to rise, she's not able to do anything. Beren gets his hand bitten off, and it's a whole other adventure. But in the example that I used earlier of the greatest magic, Melian and Thingol touching hands in the forest and standing still for centuries while the forest grows around them, he might be immortal, but you would think after that he's going to collapse. He's been standing for centuries. He hasn't had a bite of lembas or a drink of mead for hundreds of years. And what is she doing here? She's giving him energy. It's the giving of energy rather than the expanding of energy. And Melian is not tired. She doesn't need to slumber like Tulkas did after he wrestled Morgoth. The only time that we're told of a discarnate Ainur having to sleep. She was fine afterwards. So there's a very different type of magic there, and I think it's incredibly powerful. Sid has his hand up. Go ahead, cool. Sid.
Two comments on that. One is, those who serve Eru purely are connected to the flame eternal. And if their energy is used up, it is renewed. That's part of where Gandalf the White gained power even after bodily death. Those who cut themselves off from the flame eternal, Morgoth and Sauron, come strongly to mind. Every time they use their power, they get permanently weaker.
They diminish.
They diminish, and that's why Sauron, is nine-fingered in the Third Age. He can't he can't grow a finger back. And it doesn't sound like so there's a perpetual weakening. I had 2 points.
I just want to say one little line here. You remind me, Sid, of the line from the Children of Húrin, where Húrin spoke to Morgoth, and he says, "You have spent yourself on yourself."
Exactly. And now the other thing is there's a comparable piece of magic, much less powerful, that shows how powerful Luthien's magic was. And it is one of the most powerful spells of the Third Age. The Phial of Galadriel, sitting in Lothlórien, I would argue sitting in that same dell that had her magic mirror. Her physical place of power, again, in the earth receiving, just like Gondolin, the light of Eärendil's star, a Silmaril, and becoming a liquid embodiment of the energy of the Silmarils for the Third Age. And its power as a tool made by a spell is enormous. Outdoes Shelob easily. Does many other powerful things to keep them going all the way to at Mount Doom. But at Mount Doom, it has no power at all. Because at the center of Sauron's evil power, I don't remember, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the exact language memorized, but it's a very clear, accurate paraphrase. At the center of Sauron's power at Mount Doom, all other powers wither.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
that even the center of what Tolkien calls hell, of Morgoth's power, her power doesn't, it exhausts her to do it, but for as long as it lasts, her power doesn't diminish. And that, I think, marks a fascinating parallel with a very big difference.
Also, light is an interesting thing because it's very powerful, but you can't overly rely on it. What we see, and we see it with the Silmaril. Beren gets it off of the crown, goes for a second one, breaks his knife. They start worrying because part of the shard of the knife cuts Morgoth, and they're thinking this guy's going to wake up any second now. She's exhausted. The greatest of all the werewolves is bearing down on them. And what does Beren do? He holds up the Silmaril, and what does the werewolf do? Eats it, along with his hand. That there are some times where you can't just hide behind light. And then it leads to the fall of Doriath because because of Carcharoth being wicked, the Silmaril burns him from the inside. He loses his mind and is unable to be turned aside by the girdle of Melian, and he just runs blindly forward through it, just like Earendil went through the similar barrier around the Undying Lands with the Silmaril, and yeah, that leads to the fall of Doriath. I mean, of course, Thingol, the dwarves, had a lot to play in it too, but the girdle being broken there, that was a huge thing.
Yeah.
So basically, the power of light, even when ill used, as in the stomach of Carcharoth, cuts through all webs.
Yep.
Like whether Melians or Shelobs.
Yep. There you go. And I think, in a sense, that Carcharoth, we're told that Huan, an important character in Beren and Luthien, is protected by fate because he could only be destroyed by the greatest of the werewolves. And I think from the villain's side, there's probably a similar thing, that Carcharoth could only be destroyed by a certain dog. So the Silmaril was not going to turn him aside.
What's more powerful than Tolkien plot armor?
Well, I mean, when Tolkien definitely had a thing for dogs, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But something else here. It just struck me that if we look back at the origins of the Silmarils, we get to the trees. Mm-hmm. If we look at the origin of the light of the trees, we get to the towers in the north and south of Valinor. What was the original purpose? Well, the source was Elbereth. And the original purpose was to light the world. And so we're talking, and the same with carrier of the secret flame of Anor, the sun, to light the world. Mm-hmm. So this power to light the world, and Eru created the world through music, but the Judeo-Christian version is let there be light. In Eru is let there be song.
Behold your music.
Behold your music. But in the Bible, it's let there be light.
It's a definite parallel. I'm glad you mentioned the lamps. I'll get to you in a second, Matt. We've got 2.5 minutes, so you'll have time. I'm glad you mentioned the lamps and all that, because Corey Olsen once said that Morgoth had a complicated relationship with light. He loved to cast it down. He destroyed the lamps, so they made the trees. This time he needed help. He needed an Ungoliant. He finally destroys the trees. Then they make the sun. He can't get to it physically, and it's being carried by a Maya that, quite frankly, he's afraid of. So he can't do anything about it then. But then he's attracted to light. He wants to wear the Silmarils on his head, even though they're burning him. He wanted to marry Varda. The guy is there's a bit of duality there going. He has a very complicated relationship with light. And I think it goes into what Eru Ilúvatar said to him at the beginning of time, or before the beginning of the count of time at least, that it is all tributary to my glory. You're a part of me too. Even him, he's even wanting light. He just wants control over it.
Yeah, and I mean that ultimately comes to the ultimate rebellion of Morgoth, and I'm using Tolkien's phrase here, my Satan figure.
Okay, we got to
Which
give
is-
it back to Matt though, because there's a minute left.
Last phrase.
Okay.
I told you anything you want to interrupt, give me 30 seconds. Uh, Morgoth wants to unseat and replace the Lord of Light. Eru.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm
I
done
was
for the
going to
note.
say, earlier we were talking about Luthien, and it's interesting that sleep in the biblical or religious terms in a lot of religious traditions, sleep is basically the term for basically death. You don't really die, you just go to sleep. So the most powerful spell she can cast isn't a death spell, it's a sleep spell. Death for Morgoth, death spell for Morgoth, for example, is actually real death because he is dying himself. He's diminishing. He's dying. He's separated from Eru and all these things. And last thing I want to say is just that Melian's power is to protect, and Luthien's is sleep. And the two concepts of protection and sleep are just so peaceful just to think about. If you think about the powers of those two people there, Melian and Luthien. So this has been a fun nut to
Matt?
crack. So thanks.
Yep.
It's been
Final thoughts, Matt. Go ahead.
those are my final.
Those
thoughts,
are your
and
final
I'm
thoughts.
pretty
Okay.
good.
Sid, final
Well,
thoughts.
my
Okay.
final thought is, we go through these three segments, and this segment in particular, and it's just fun to have so much fun harmony in interpretation with you guys. So thank you.
Sid, final thoughts on
I'm
this?
going to do one final thought, jumping from using the idea of sleep and jumping from Melian and Luthien to Aslan and C.S. Lewis. When someone utterly denies Aslan, the only thing Aslan can do to help the poor guy is put him to sleep. That's what happens to the uncle in the book that was at the creation of the world, the wizard who
The wizard's nephew.
magician.
A magician's nephew. That's
Yeah.
what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, the magician's nephew. Yeah. So basically, Aslan puts him to sleep and says, "Take him back home. That's all I can do for him."
My final thought here is it's interesting that we wound up on the topic of sleep because I made the comment earlier that we're really only told of discarnate Ainur sleeping in just two instances. One was Morgoth being basically forced to sleep, and the other was Tulkas choosing to sleep after he wrestled with Morgoth. Obviously, the wizards, they sleep, because they're in incarnated bodies and they need that rest. But normally, we don't hear about that. The elves sleep, the men sleep, even orcs must sleep. Hobbits sleep, Ents sleep, such and such. The Ainur really don't seem to sleep, so it's sort of interesting that we're told that Tulkas slumbers, and then that's when Morgoth starts breaking the lamps, or in this case, Morgoth is put to sleep by Luthien, and it's just sort of interesting. And I obviously we see why Morgoth is put to sleep, but why did Tulkas take a nap? We're gonna have to discuss that.
I have
one
a theory
day.
about that.
Let's hear it real quick. Oh, we're not hearing you.
Can you hear
Try
me
it
now?
again. Yes.
Okay. My theory is that the only two that ever come in physical contact with one another of the Valar are Tulkas and Melkor. And it's almost like what you might call a double negative Ojo crossing. Like when you actually leave maybe the intent of Eru and start to physically combat each other, which is a physical effort that's not of design. It's not of what the design is. It's physical combat, physical struggle. That once you go into that realm of combat, you kind of lose what you might call your protection, and you enter into a phase of what you might call pseudo mortality. And as you sit there and struggle, you actually start to become weak. You don't necessarily die, but your battery gets expended because you're in this physical contest, which Melkor also probably felt like, oh my God, that was really really
Yeah.
difficult to deal with this guy,
I'm
and
glad
so
you
there's this
amended that.
draining. Yeah, so there's this draining feeling of maybe not sleep, but what you might call for a Valar, you
Okay.
might call this recuperation, and they have no other term for it.
Okay.
But that's my
Matt.
theory about that.
Okay. Yeah, that's why I said real quick. Just to comment, I'm glad you amended it to say combat because you first said they're the only two Valar to make physical contact, and I'm like, well, several of them are married to each other, so.
Yeah, I didn't mean that.
Yeah, Sid.
But to say this very simply, earthly combat, bodies sleep,
Wrestling specifically, yeah.
emotions don't sleep, minds don't sleep, so battles of will can go on without draining you to that point. But in the elements, earth, water, air, fire, earth, where do we sleep? We lie down on the earth.
Mhm.
So it's about being too much in the earth. And that's why Morgoth couldn't get up to the above air realms, the heavens,
Yeah.
because and this is explicit in Tolkien, he became too earthbound.
He became
And therefore,
incarnate.
I have a question if anyone has a concrete answer with a citation. Do the Astari, do the wizards need to eat? I haven't figured that one out yet.
I believe that they do. We never hear that absolutely that, it isn't mentioned in like the nature of Middle Earth or anything, but Gandalf eats. Like we know that he does.
But we don't know if you mentioned that when he was locked at the top of Orthanc that Saruman ever fed him. So how long can he go without food?
I would say longer than most people could because he's also able to do direct combat with the Balrog for 11 days, and he has that ring, and that does help him too. He was only up there for like 12 hours or so, maybe. He wasn't up there very long.
Wait, on top of Orthanc, he was there for months.
No, he was not there for months. Because it said that Saruman came to talk to him just a few days later, and he was already gone.
I'll have to. Well, it's on a calendar. I'll look it up.
Yeah,
I think he was up there for. I think it was up there for 3 or 4 days actually.
It might have been I think that it was specifically said 4 days later when Saruman checked on him and he was gone. We don't know how long he was gone. We just know that eventually Gwaihir showed up and was like, "What are you doing on the roof, dude?" And then they had their conversation.
You know how we eat 3 times a day.
Wait, hold on. I can't hear when you both talk.
I'm just saying, let's drop that until we can look at a calendar. I know what calendar to look at.
Yeah.
See you next month.
You know how we eat 3 times a day, let's say average humans?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There must be some kind of exchange rate of what, because he's physical. He has to be physical. He has physical body. He has physical, that's just the deal. So he has, but I'll bet you it's something like, if he really had to push it, he might be on the 3 times a month plan. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I just think it's really elongated.
Well, I don't think that he would do that normally because it wouldn't be pleasant for him, but I think that, the wizards probably could go a pretty long time without eating, but then they would start to weaken. I mean, these guys even age. These bodies are essentially mortal. It's just happened very slowly. It took over 2,000 years for Saruman's hair to go almost all the way white.
Yeah. Well, everyone's always eating, and making a stew and soups and stuff, and he partakes very, very rarely, and so maybe it's not 3 a month, maybe it's just 3 meals a week for all we know. I don't know.
He eats a lot in The Hobbit. I don't know, but then
he definitely can't.
Yeah, he eats.
His real power is not gaining weight.
Because he can.
Well, because he walks so much.
There.
He walks so much. The guy gets around.
Yeah.
And even when he's on a horse, I don't know if you guys have ever been horseback riding, but it's a bit of a workout.
I just hear Gandalf saying, "The last time I visited Bilbo, I gained 10 pounds."
that is why I walk to Rivendell.
Well, he must be kind of like a bear where, when you're in Hobbiton, you're going to eat as much as you can because you can, and then you may not be eating again for another month.
Well, I think the thing with Gandalf is, and I think you'll agree with me, is that he's the kind of guy who, won't turn down good hospitality.
Right.
And
that's the real reason we went a bit out of the way north to see Bayonne, I'm sure.
now, see, Alice in the chat there, my moderator, says this maybe Gandalf lifts weights. He's pumping iron on the side. And, me and you, Matt, had this discussion of if there was like a remake of The Lord of the Rings made today, who would we cast in certain roles? And I remember I said that J.K. Simmons would make a great Gandalf. If you've ever seen J.K. Simmons with his shirt off, holy Eru, the guy is jacked.
Is he really?
Yeah. He's into weightlifting, so if you just look up a picture of... And I remember there was this picture going around of J.K. Simmons, who's an older gentleman, in a weight room, doing a bicep curl and everything, and he's very muscular, and he was on one of those talk shows, and the talk show host asked him, is that a real picture, or is that Photoshop? And he goes, oh, no, it's real. And he brings out his muscle, and it's like, yeah, this guy's... He looks skinny from his face, but he's not.
Yeah.
Another reason I think he'd be a good Gandalf is he could do all the physical stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm all about...
Now, I could see this... I could see from Sid's webcam there's this glow, and I think that he's on Google image search right now.
Yeah, I got him lifting weights.
Impressive, right? For an older gentleman. Good for him.
Yeah. His arm, biceps are outrageous.
Yeah.
And he wears a gold weight belt at the gym.
Yeah, I mean, the guy, he's definitely physically active, that's for sure. And I think Gandalf is physically active. So, yeah, he might eat a lot of seed cake when he's at Bilbo's place, but he's walking around and he's practicing his sword fighting. He's probably doing some sort of sports with the elves and whatnot. So he keeps himself... but what, interesting, because we never hear about... I think Alice brings up a funny point. We never hear of weightlifting, pumping iron, as Alice put it, in Middle-earth, right? Can you imagine... I just want to imagine Tulkas with a boulder just doing this,
I mean, if you think about how hard their life is, which is basically Dark Ages, and you're walking this much and swinging these swords for 3 or 4 hours at a time, you're going to be in shape.
Yeah.
Just to survive on a day-to-day basis. Hey, I want to ask you real quick, John. Did you say a couple weeks ago that you were into or have been looking at art of a person named Anka Eisman?
I think I used one of Anka's drawings in one of my questions. Why?
I was just curious if that was the person you were telling me. We were talking about Elena Kukunova.
Elena
and you were
Kukunova.
saying, well, there's this... Yeah, Elena Kukunova, that you were saying there was somebody that you really, really liked. Was it Anka Eisman?
No, the example that I used was Jenny Dolphin, actually.
Oh, okay. Do you guys know who Anka Eisman is?
I've definitely seen the name, and I've definitely used her paintings for my answers here and there.
How do you spell her last name?
I think it's Eissman.
No, it's 2 N's.
Okay.
Yeah. Her art looks very similar to kind of like Al and Lee had a baby, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I have her website up here, and I've definitely used a few of these portraits here and there. It's
just
funny.
A shout out to Anka Eisman and Elena Kukunova. Just fabulous. Fabulous.
That would be a good topic for next month.
Well, we tried to do that, remember?
Yeah, but we just need some prep to make it work.
We did it. We had
a conversation.
It was going to be my half-hour segment, but then after a discussion with both of you, we decided that it would just be like an intro thing where we just shouted out a few artists that we appreciate.
Yeah, all right.
And I know that it's just funny that me and Matt both focused on the ladies there.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest just that the three of us build a gallery during the month, and next month or the month after, any one of us can use their half hour to host it.
Well, the biggest thing is we've got to figure out this YouTube streaming thing, because this stream was supposed to be on YouTube and it's not. So Alice, you're in the chat here. You saw my message on on Discord, if you can do me a big favor, it doesn't have to be right now, but if you could look into how it is that I'm supposed to enable streaming on my YouTube account. Because when I clicked the link, it said that it enabled streaming, and I technically went live for about a minute, but it was actually on my gaming channel, which Twitch is not even supposed to be logged into. So I was just very confused, and when I tried to do the same thing on my John Sierra Tolkien Scholar channel, the message that I got is streaming is not available right now. So I don't know if I have to... Do I have to reach a certain number of subscribers? I thought 2,000 had me covered here.
Is it okay if I bow out, guys?
Well, before you bow out, why don't you do your plugs and promote yourself, because we're going to end the stream anyway.
Okay, well, thank you very much for
Thank you, Alice.
having me with you. And I will continue to follow the themes you've been seeing. I'm mostly on Quora with several thousand Tolkien answers and a bunch of other, an equal amount of other stuff, including if you liked what I said about yin and yang, look me up under Taoism. And I'm also on Archive of Our Own, AO3, which is the leading Tolkien and everyone else fan fiction site with about 10 different stories. One of them, as I mentioned, about all of the different ring bearers, and another one about Sauron and a different version of how he might have gone south in the first place, and lots of good stuff. And I'd love to see you there as well. And drop me a note if you get there. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all next month.
Matt, go ahead and do your promotions real quick.
Well, I also write articles on Quora. I'm on Quora as Lore Master, so if anybody's out there who wants to see articles by Sid Kemp or John Sierra or me, I go under Lore Master. And we also have our site as Lore Masters altogether at loremaster.com. That's LORE-master.com.
The link is in the description.
In the links, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you want to reach out to us there and see some of our articles and some of the things we talk about, read those and connect with me through that portal. But anyway, thanks for joining us tonight. It was nice having you. I hope that you enjoyed the show.
And of course, you guys know me. I'm on YouTube and Twitch and Quora as well, under the name John Sierra, or NecroVMX on Twitch. And all the relevant links will be in the description. So we're going to head over to here, and we're going to do a raid. So don't go anywhere, guys, just yet. Very quickly, I'm going to go over the schedule. We're going to end the YouTube recording here.